Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is another weird day. And I've got some good stories, some older stories, as far as way back when, the good old days. And let's start there. First story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and this dates all the way back to, as a matter of fact, this date coincides with, as far as, when you look at Jack the Ripper had been doing stuff not too long before. H. Holmes was doing his thing in Chicago. Uh, Pearl Bryan got killed. They had a lot of weird stuff. Bram Stoker was putting out Dracula. So yeah, but this is not make believe. This is real, and this is titled "The Strange Death of Lillian Lowe." In July 23rd, 1895, Lillian, aka Lily Lowe, was found dead in the wood at Washington Heights. She had seated herself with her back against the stump of a tree and had shot a revolver bullet through her right temple. She was 19 years old. What started out as a scandal involving the suicide of the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy New York man would evolve into scandalous stories involving infidelity and murder from all those involved in her death. Lillian Lowe's body was taken to the undertaker Maloney's shop at 400 East 26th Street. Her father, James Lowe Jr., purchased two plots in Woodland Cemetery, one for his daughter and the other for himself. His brother, Joseph T. Lowe, had refused to allow Lily to be laid to rest in a family plot since she was a suicide. There was no religious ceremony at the grave. The police were still trying to solve the mystery of Lily's death and to verify the motive which led her to take her life. In the bosom of her dress, a letter addressed to Dear Baby Cuckoo and signed Big Brother Tommy was found. It was determined that Henry T. Champney and Dr. Thomas Jacob Biggs III had composed it, and Tommy was believed to be Dr. Biggs. At the time of Lillian's suicide, Henry Champney was 70 years old and Biggs was 31. Right after Lillian's body was found, Dr. Biggs disappeared from his office on East 30th Street. He'd been a prominent physician in Cincinnati connected with a medical college. 4 years before, he divorced his wife Lula, citing fraud. She had left him after 60 days and did not oppose the divorce. This was fodder for the tabloids and did not reflect well on his character. The nature of the fraud that led to the divorce, or more importantly, why she left the marriage after only 2 months, was never explained. Biggs was the son of a wholesale grocer from Cincinnati, who was also an elder at the Glendale Presbyterian Church. He was on the staff of Bellevue Hospital for a year, then returned to Glendale, and then left as an army surgeon in the Northwest. After a brief stay, he returned to Glendale and associated himself with Dr. C. H. Chetwood as an assistant at DeMille Dispensary at 23rd Street and 2nd Avenue. So this is Dr. Biggs. He's not a poor guy. His dad is a Presbyterian minister. He's got a business in Cincinnati, and he comes and goes. And remember, back then, a divorce like that, like all of a sudden after 2 months, your wife walks out and you divorce her on the premise of fraud. And by the way, this was unknown until Lillian Lowe's suicide. That's when all this was dug up. So of course, tabloids have always been tabloids. But let's keep going. The morning of Lily's burial, a detective was sent to New Rochelle to look for Robert W. Inman and his friend Henry Champney, who were frequently seen in Lily's company during the last few months of her life. But it was learned that Inman's yacht had relocated further up the Sound. Robert W. Inman was a junior member of the Inman, Swan and Company, and he was a nephew of John W. Inman, the Southern Railroad magnate and cotton merchant. Not surprisingly, he denied any involvement with Lillian Lowe. However, this is not what spared him scrutiny in the case, but for the fact he died only a month later in August 1895. So you're seeing that poor little Lillian Lowe, yeah, she's illegitimate and she kind of comes from a wealthy family, but let's face it, talk about being born on the wrong side of the blankets. But here she's got all these older men who are very well placed in society, like around her. So let's see. Okay, we're talking here about Inman. His yacht Adelaide collided with the steamer Perseus off Bay Ridge. Everyone else on board with him was accounted for, but it was feared he was drowned but there were others who suspected that since he was an eccentric man, he had gotten ashore and concealed the fact he was alive. This idea was dispelled when his body was found floating in Staten Island waters a week later. The officers of the Perseus were indicted on manslaughter charges. During those days when Robert Inman sneaked off on his yacht, coroner's warrants were issued seeking Dr. James J. Biggs, Henry P. Champney, who was vice president of the Bovine Company, and a Miss Amelia K. Hansen, who had the same address as Champney since she ran a boarding house for men, where one of the two men resided. They were charged with having knowledge of the death of Lillian Lowe. Lillian's father described that his daughter left her home in March of the same year, complaining that he was cruel to her. He said he always provided for her in all things. But Lily's misfortune started with the circumstances of her birth. 25 years before, James Lowe went to France and fell in love with a French woman named Josephine Ramois, who he met in Nice. They never married but lived together for a number of years. During their time together, she bore him 6 children, 5 of whom he said she killed. One by one, soon after birth, she would destroy them. One she threw into a tub of freezing water, another she suffocated with cologne. Lily survived because she was the only daughter. Eventually, James Lowe found out she had a husband somewhere, but it was only after she left him for another man that he took Lily with him. They traveled around the world and had come to New York 4 years before. He said that Miss Hanson lured Lily to go and live with her. Mr. Lowe tried repeatedly to have Lily return and live with him, but she declined all his offers. One day he went to see her, and Miss Hanson denied she was in the house and ordered him to leave. He pleaded to see his daughter, and Miss Hanson called Dr. Biggs, who ejected him from the premises. The reason he gave for their interest in Lily was that as his only heir, she would inherit his wealth. He said that during the winter, when they learned of Lily's illegitimate birth, they tried to blackmail his brother Joseph, who was a wealthy millionaire merchant. Joseph Lowe did not receive them, and the scheme went nowhere. Dr. Hanlon autopsied Lily and found marks of violence on her body, which indicated she might have been raped. Perhaps Lily had committed suicide due to the attack. It was learned that Lily had a dispute with Miss Hanson and 2 days later killed herself. Lily's father told a reporter, "I do not know, but really her end was not a surprise to me. I had a strange presentiment that she would come to a bad end. I did my best to get her back, but I could not. I could not get near her." According to the 3 persons accused of some type of involvement in Lily's death, the girl had threatened suicide twice. Once she took poison, but was saved. Mrs. Trison, who rented the apartment where Mr. Lowe and his daughter lived, told reporters, quote, "The stories that he beat her and ill-treated her are absolutely false. I never saw father and daughter who showed so much affection for each other as they did. Mr. Lowe's eyes were troubling him, and he never went out much. Even when he was sick last March, she said to me one day, with her pretty French accent, 'My father is the only friend I have in the world, and if he should die, I would kill myself.'" End quote. The Lowe family was well connected. James Lowe Jr. was the son of James Lowe, president of the United States Trust Company and a millionaire. His sister Laura went on to marry Oliver Harriman, the Wall Street banker. She was one of the leaders of New York's fashionable society. The family belonged to the top 400 of New York families. However, James Lowe was the black sheep of his family, and neither he or his daughter were welcome at the Harriman house. 2 days after Lily's funeral, Oscar Lipsker, a Mott Street baker, said he had seen Lily and Dr. Biggs go into the little grove on Washington Heights where the body was found. He said from their conversation and mannerism toward each other, they appeared to be lovers. On July 30th, the coroner's jury returned a verdict of suicide. The 3 persons in custody were released. Why Lily's body bore signs of violence and rape were never explained. Later on, it turned out that while Henry Champney was spending time at Amelia Hanson's boarding house, he was a married man. His wife Lydia died in February 1896, and he married Amelia 2 months later. She was a 44-year-old spinster and 27 years younger than him. What was not known during the months after Lillian Lowe's death and Champney's divorce is that Amelia was pregnant with his child. A daughter was born on December 26, 1895. So here, again, you have this whirlpool of scandal. She moves in, Lillian Lowe moves into this, you know, This lady Amelia Hansen, she's already in her early 40s. She has a boarding house for men. One of these men lived there. One of them is this guy Champney, who is married all along, right? Even while everybody's alive. In other words, his wife is alive, Lillian Lowe's alive. He's obviously having an affair with Amelia Hansen, and she's pregnant with his child. Right after Lillian dies, Champney gets a divorce from his wife, turns around, gets married to Amelia Hansen, and they have a child within a few months. You do the math, and you can tell she was pregnant. So again, you see this very how can I say, highbrowed New York family or circumstances, and it's everything but underneath. Okay, now let's go on. This lady, Edith Trowbridge Champney, was the daughter of Amelia and Henry Champney. And when she's 17, she elopes with Robert Kaiser, had one child, and died in 1925 at the age of 29. So this one issue that they had together, the lady died at the age of 29. So anyway, let's keep going. Now, there was a strange story that appeared briefly in 1871. Proceedings were started against Lewis Worth, where a writ of habeas corpus was issued, directing him to produce Amelia Hansen, age 17. Amelia's mother charged that 3 years before, when the girl was 14, she was enticed away by Worth, with whom she had lived in an improper relations ever since, and by whom she is now with child. The outcome of the proceedings remain unknown. Was the Lewis Worth mentioned a sergeant of the Ninth Sub-Precinct who was active in those years? Was the young Amelia the same Amelia Hansen who would figure in the death of Lillian Lowe years later? James Lowe, perhaps to forget the tragedy of his daughter's death, remarried in 1900 to Esmeralda Campbell. He was 60, she was 30, and a year later they had a son who died the same day of his birth. They remained married until his death in 1926. 2 years later, Esmeralda Lowe married a much younger man named Ivan Heyer Brower. He was 30 years younger than her. According to Esmeralda, it was supposed to be a platonic relationship, but her young husband wouldn't work and drank often. He wanted to live off the fortune she had inherited from her dead husband, which was estimated to be about $1 million, which, by the way, $1 million back then was a lot of money. Esmeralda sued for divorce alleging cruelty and finally secured her release in 1931. She told the courts that her husband repeatedly assaulted and attempted to assault her, using vile and abusive language causing her great anguish in mind and body, that he is a habitual drunkard, threatened to throw acid in her face, and on one occasion threatened to run their automobile over an embankment to kill them both. With this thing of Mr. Brower, we're doing like a little hot tub time moment with him. Okay, obviously this 1919, he's a younger man, and believe it or not, he finds himself involved in another mess divorce, and this is the way it played out. Dr. Fred J. Farrington was charged in misconduct and a petition for divorce filed by his wife, Meta E. Farrington. She named 6 or 7 co-respondents. Brower acted as a witness and testified that he had seen Madeline Taylor in the company of Dr. Farrington. He also testified he had seen Mrs. Dodge in Lakewood with Farrington at 2 different weekends. He underwent an hour-long cross-examination. He testified to having been under treatment for a time for some nervous disorder. What brought the testimony to an end was when the defense attorney tried to impeach his credibility based on his father's identity. Okay, now remember, see, and I tell everybody that's the thing. Back then, people had long memories, and it wasn't only what you did; it was also what your family or your father had done. Okay, Brower was the son of Dr. Frank Brower of Toms River, who was tried in September 1905 of having murdered his wife, Carrie Brower, who was only 34 years old when she died. In December 1905, the body of Carrie Brower was exhumed based on allegations from her brother. She married Dr. Frank R. Brower in 1896 and had 2 sons. 3 years before her death, there was talk of divorce, but proceedings were dropped. She died after 11 days of illness, and her husband was the one who attended her medically, Statements were made by two nurses, Miss Lippincott and Miss Dudley, attending Carrie Brower, caused her brother to demand an investigation. She had called Dr. Henry Kate for medical attention. However, he had borrowed $600 from her a year before and used his household and office goods as collateral. He was not present when she died, but he signed her death certificate giving acute Bright's disease as the cause of death. In the 3 months between his wife's death and the investigation, Brower had brought a Miss McClanahan, one of his patients, to live at his house. It was alleged he was the cause of a break between Dr. Brower and his wife before her death. Once the investigation started, she left the house. The autopsy found she had not died of Bright's disease. Coincidentally, on December 9th, Dr. Henry Hamilton, Kate, disappeared from Lakewood where he was in charge of a sanitarium. On December 27th, he wandered into the police station at Springfield, Massachusetts, saying he had lost his memory. He said he couldn't remember his name or where he lived, only that he was a Mason since he had a watch charm with their emblem. Eventually, he was identified since he was being sought by the authorities in Toms River. Kate said he had diagnosed the case based on Brower's assertion that his wife had suffered from Bright's disease. So here you can see this guy, Kate, owes this poor lady money. Okay. I guess I don't know how he ends up signing her death certificate even though he was not present for it. Then all of a sudden he disappears. By the way, this Toms River was a little town, New Jersey, and wanders around and says, I can't remember anything. This is great. All right, so the only thing he knows when he walks in is that I think I'm a Mason. So Case said he had diagnosed the case based on Brower's assertion that his wife had suffered from Bright's disease. Dr. Form, who was called in to consult with Dr. Brower, was positive that Mrs. Brower was not suffering from Bright's and refused to sign the death certificate. The autopsy showed that death was not due to spinal meningitis, appendicitis, or aneurysm that would have coincided with Carrie Brower's symptoms. It was found that she had an inflamed stomach and bowels and fatty changes in the liver, pancreas, lungs, and kidneys. A chemist examined the organ tissue and found arsenic in her body. Dr. Brower was accused of poisoning his wife with arsenic, strychnine, and ground glass and went to trial in October 1906. He was found innocent on a defense of potamine poisoning or ptomaine poisoning. I don't know how to pronounce that. Within 7 months of the acquittal, Frank Brower became engaged to Esther B. Singleton. During his trial, she had taken flowers and delicacies to him in his cell. The newspapers announced that a June wedding was planned. Then all mention of the romance dropped from the newspapers. The wedding never occurred, and in 1909 it was reported that she was marrying William Liming. What did she find out about Dr. Brower that derailed the relationship? Her father had been one of his staunchest supporters and helped him get acquitted. So here you have this guy Brower who, remember, this is a hot tub time moment. He marries Esmeralda Lowe, who's 30 years older than him. She's like, I want out because he's a crazy guy. About 11 years earlier, he's being a witness for a woman who's, remember, this was the time where if you wanted a divorce, you had to like basically give a good reason and you name people like, hey, I'm divorcing this person because. So he's being a witness for her, and the husband, his defense team starts hammering him. And then they bring up the fact that his father had been accused of murder, of murdering his own mother. So here we are now. We're in the middle of Dr. Brower, who gets off of poisoning his wife, brings brings a girl to live over the house just weeks after his wife has died. She's gone, and then while he's sitting in jail waiting to go to trial, and there's this lady, very young, looking at it, Esther B. Singleton. She was coming to his cell and bringing him delicacies and taking care of him. Her father is doing everything he can to get this guy off and get acquitted, which it worked. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, okay, they don't even talk about it. All of a sudden, the wedding's off. Everything's off. No more, no more romance. No more nothing. Next thing you know, she's saying, "Oh, she's marrying somebody else." What did she find out? But anyway, let's keep going. So in 1910, Frank Brower married Mrs. Lydia Kirk. This was her third marriage. She was first married to Edwin Kirk in 1896. They had one son named for his father. 2 years later, the couple had divorced and she married his brother, William Kirk. They had one son that died in infancy. At some point, she divorced him. So again, these I'm laughing, and the reason why is because here you have a man who was accused of killing his wife, gets off. He ends up marrying a divorced woman that married first one brother, then the other, gives each one a son. Okay, so here you are. So she ends up divorcing both brothers. Okay, and she ends up marrying Frank Brower, Dr. Frank Brower, in 1910. So fast forward 5 years, it's 1915. Frank Brower was involved in another messy scenario and dragged his wife into it. He was accused of influencing a separation between Harold Mahler and his wife Emily. He knew the couple since he was the family physician. 5 months after the separation, the Browers, along with Mrs. Mahler, went to her husband's house, who was out hunting ducks. The three started to pack up things and were leaving when Margaret Kennedy, a nurse at the house, threatened them with a pistol. She was arrested after Mrs. Mahler filed a complaint against her. However, Mr. Mahler bailed her out within hours. Then Dr. Brower and his wife were arrested after being charged with unlawfully entering the Mahler home. His wife was charged as well. The charges were dropped when Mr. Mahler dropped dead from apoplexy in November 1915 at the age of 42. So, then the situation became more embroiled when it was found out that Harold Mahler had made a new will disinheriting his wife. She challenged the second will, and ultimately their home was put up for auction. In 1917, Emily Mahler charged that Margaret Kennedy, who had threatened her with a gun, had taken 17 railroad bonds, $600 in cash, 3 diamond studs, a black pearl pin, a diamond ring, and other jewelry which were in Harold Mahler's possession when he died. When Harold Mahler had died in 1915, he was on an automobile trip with Miss Kennedy, who described herself as a nurse and personal attendant to Mr. Mahler. The outcome of the case was never revealed. When Frank Brower died in 1936 at the age of 65, he named his wife Lydia, his stepson Edwin, and his son Alan as beneficiaries. He excluded his son Evan Brower, who by then had been involved in the messy divorce from Esmeralda Lowe. As to the three individuals that were suspected of causing Lillian Slowe's death in some form, they went on to have their own strange experiences. Dr. Thomas Biggs married Louise Pitt in 1902. She was 18 years his junior. Then he went on to practice medicine in Stamford, Connecticut, and in 1910 was the city health officer. In 1913, he died at the age of 48 of complications from Bright's disease. Henry Champney was released based on the findings of the coroner's jury in 1895 in regard to Lillian Lowe's death. However, in May 1898, he was once more embroiled in a scandal of a strange death. This one involved a neighbor. Amelia Krause reported at the coroner's office that her sister, Miss Catherine C. Robitzchek, died April 25, 1898, under mysterious circumstances. One of the persons figuring in the matter was Amelia Champney, wife of Henry T. Champney, president of the Bovine Prepared Food Company. Mrs. Krause asked for an investigation at the request of her sister, Lady Nora Gordon, who lived in Monte Carlo, who on learning of their sister's death cabled her. They employed private investigators, and based on their findings, the family wanted the matter presented to the Austrian Council since the family had immigrated from this country. Their sister Catherine died at her home at 174 West 82nd Street at the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Her body was taken by a family living opposite her apartment. The said neighbors were Henry Champney and his wife. She claimed that the Champneys knew where she lived and also knew the address of their brothers who also lived in New York City. Mrs. Krause claimed they found out about their sister's death 5 days after the event, and only through their sibling that lived in Monte Carlo. They went to the Champneys, who had taken charge of the body, and the couple refused to give the family any information. They could not even learn where the body was sent until a detective found it at an undertaker's on 23rd Street. They not only concealed her death, but they had taken all her belongings to their house. They had also dismissed her own doctor and had engaged another one to care for her during her last illness. When Catherine Rabotchik died, the Champney took it upon themselves to dismiss her two servants, and their whereabouts were unknown so they could not be questioned by police. Mrs. Krause said the family did not even know their sister was unusually ill. When she sent her daughters to check on Catherine 2 or 3 times per week prior to her death, the servants said she would not see them, which seemed very strange to the family since they were on friendly terms. After hearing the story from Amelia Krause, a reporter went to see Mr. Champney at his home at 157 West 82nd Street. Surprisingly, Mr. Champney was in a conversation with a young man who turned out to be working for the undertakers who had charge of the body. Both men left the room, and then the undertaker returned to the room and told the reporter that, quote, Mr. Champney has decided not to be seen on the matter. Later, Mr. Champney said, we notified only the sister in Europe of the death because she was the one to whom the deceased property went. We took charge of Mrs. Robitschek only as a matter of benevolence. She was a friend of ours, and that is all there is to it. Catherine Robitschek, who was 45 years old, was determined to have died from heart and lung trouble, as determined by Dr. Russell T. Ruff, who attended her. She left a will in which she named Mrs. Champney as executrix. The coroners decided to hold the body until an autopsy could be made by their physician. However, they had little hope of discovering anything since the body had been embalmed. Deputy Coroner Albert T. Weston met with Amelia Krause of 10 West 82nd Street, along with her brothers Max and Isaac Rabatschik, and told them that without proof of foul play in the death of their sister Catherine, an autopsy would not be completed. The newspaper noted that Henry T. Champney figured in the suicide case of Lillian Lowe in 1895. Now remember, this is only 3 years after Lillian Lowe's death. He's married Amelia Hansen, now she's Amelia Champney, and they kind of like have this lady who's not really that old, 45 years old, and they turn away. All of a sudden, they like take over. Anybody coming to see her, no, she doesn't want to see you. Get out of here. She dies. They take her body. They take all her belongings. They only let the one sibling who's in Europe know about it, even though they were aware that she had siblings which were in the city. Nothing wrong there, right? So let's keep going. So according to Mrs. Krause, the Amelia Hansen arrested in the case of Lillian Lowe was now Mrs. Champney. When asked by the reporter if this was true, Amelia Hansen became indignant and refused to reply. Amelia Krause failed to sign an affidavit in a timely manner, and her sister was buried, and no further investigation was made into whether Catherine's death was natural or not. Henry Champney died in 1913 and his wife Amelia in 1938. It wasn't only the people involved in the death of Lillian Lowe, but the place as well that remained notorious, even years afterward. In 1902, the house where Lily lived with Amelia Hansen, located at 103 West 58th Street, known as the Clarence Apartments, was cited by the newspapers as a house tied to tragedy. Turned out the apartment occupied by William Hooper Young, grandson of Brigham Young, was where he murdered Mrs. Anna Pulitzer. On September 19th, 1902, an Anna Pulitzer was found in the Morris Canal outside Jersey City, New Jersey. She'd been stabbed several times and her head was bruised. Her nude body was weighed down with a hitching weight that was tied around her waist by a leather strap. The strap and the weight were later identified by the livery keeper who had rented the rig to Young. Anna Pulitzer was married to Joseph Pulitzer, a tailor who lived at 160 West 46th Street, Manhattan. There were rumors she engaged in prostitution, or at the very least infidelity. A day before the discovery of the body, Joseph Pulitzer had gone to the police to report on the disappearance of his wife. He described her as being 22 years old, of slender build, 5 feet 2 inches, with straw-colored hair and gray eyes. Once her body was discovered, he went to Spears Morgue and identified her remains, where he promptly collapsed. A cabman told police that a few days before her death, he took Mrs. Pulitzer and a man to an apartment in New York City that turned out to belong to John Willard Young. Inside, the police found beer bottles and a bottle with chloral hydrate crystals and a carving knife with blood on it. They found blood on bed sheets in a closet, under the kitchen sink, the floors, and the walls. The words "blood atonement" were scrawled in a notebook, and there were several references to verses from the Bible. At about the same time, Chicago police discovered a trunk filled with a dead woman's clothes which had been sent there by Young. It was determined Anna Pulitzer died from a knife thrust to her abdomen and not a drug overdose. Some of the injuries to her body occurred post mortem. It was also determined she was pregnant. During the investigation, it was found John Willard Young was in France, but his son Hooper would use the place when he was gone. The law caught up with Hooper Young in Connecticut. He was drunk and tried to disguise himself by dressing like a hobo. He blamed Pulitzer's death on a third man, Charles Eiling, who had been in the apartment with him. He left to purchase whiskey, and when he returned, she was dead. He helped Eiling dispose of the body because he didn't want his father involved in the notoriety of a prostitute being killed in his apartment. He said he tried dismembering Pulitzer's body, but after he cut into her abdomen, he lost his nerve. The police searched for Charles Eiling, and no one by that name could be found. Prior to the murder, while living in Salt Lake City, William Hooper Young was a reporter for the Herald and became notorious there for challenging another reporter for a rival paper to a duel because of an article that had been written about him. When the crime hit the newspapers, it was thought he committed the murder in accordance with the Mormon principle of blood atonement. Others thought the couple had an affair going back years when he was a Mormon missionary in New Jersey. The motive for the murder was never determined. He was tried in 1903. After initially pleading not guilty, he changed and pled guilty to second-degree murder. Ottilie Ederman, who was a witness for the prosecution, claimed she had been threatened by Mormons if she testified against Young. He was sentenced to hard labor in the state prison for the rest of his life, to be served at Sing Sing prison. The judge decided not to impose the death penalty because some doctors determined that Young was probably medically, if not legally, insane. He was also addicted to liquor, cocaine, and morphine. He was paroled in 1924 and went to live with his father in New York City, who died shortly thereafter. It's unknown which of John Willard Young's 5 wives was William's mother. In 1928, he went to California, trying to locate one of his half-sisters. In 1937, a Social Security number was issued for him. A year later, Folsom Prison listed a William Hooper Young, who was sent there from Los Angeles. The paperwork referenced that he'd been incarcerated in Sing Sing. He was charged with Section 288 Alpha or A, which in California involved oral copulation, and which also included lewd acts with a minor. The date and place of his death remain unknown. So it wasn't only the people that were around Lillian Lowe when she committed suicide, even the place where she had lived when that happened ends up being like an apartment, where he stayed for the son of Brigham Young, all right, who's got this one crazy son, all right, Hooper, who just so happens that when he's stopping in New Jersey, goes over to his dad's apartment, which the so-called apartment, and kills, whether she prostituted herself, I don't know, kills her, dumps her body. But obviously he was, and you do have one of the witnesses saying that she had Mormons telling her, you better need to, because remember, this was uh, this was the grandson of Brigham Young. And again, his own father had 5 wives. That's what we're saying. They weren't even sure which of the 5 was his mother. So again, it was everything surrounding this Lillian Lowe thing. Like, it was like that gift that keeps on giving and giving and giving, and everybody there was visited with some type of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like some type of, like, I mean, nobody leads a perfect life, but it wasn't it wasn't ordinary, just regular bad stuff. It was like really unsavory stuff. All right, let's stay with unsavory, shall we? Next story is also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, and it's titled "The Tale of the Two Bobs." Let's see. Here we go. Now, this is in 1891. A man named Robert H. Murray was released from a prison in Indiana, only to find himself arrested once more, accused of the heinous crime of killing a nun a few years before. Okay, it's August of 1891. Place is Louisville, Kentucky. A man named Robert H. Murray was released on August 4th, 1891, from the prison at Jeffersonville, Indiana. 2 days later, he was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky on the suspicion he was a felon. The allegations were that he killed a sister of charity 3 years before. The story, reported by several newspapers across the United States, described where Murray worked as a brakeman on a train that was wrecked, and he, along with others, were taken to the hospital run by the Sisters of Mercy at Terre Haute. He fell in love with a young nun who nursed him. She refused him and reported the incident to the Mother Superior, who, in an abundance of caution, sent her to Emporia, Kansas. He found out where she had been sent to and followed her there. She was working at the hospital, and once again she refused his marriage proposal. He struck her across the head with what was thought to be brass knuckles. She died a few days later, naming her assailant as Murray. So, how did Bob end up in Jeffersonville prison? In September of 1890, Robert H. Mirth, who was using the alias of Robert H. Murray, was sent to serve a 1 year sentence at the penitentiary for larceny he committed in Warwick County. He was a workman belonging to French and Company's show and stole a hat at the St. Charles Hotel that belonged to Albert Kirsch. He pled guilty to the charge and was sentenced to 2 years but released after serving half his sentence. Upon his release, Murray was arrested in Louisville as a murder suspect on the strength of a story told by Mr. Ballow, clerk of the Jeffersonville prison. Ballow went to the jail in Louisville and identified him as Murray. Supposedly, the description matched that of the alleged murderer. Murray kept denying he was a man involved in the attack against the nun. He worked for the railroad for 20 years, and in 1874 he lost 3 fingers off his right hand while coupling cars at Connersville, Indiana. However, he didn't go to the hospital in Terre Haute and instead was cared for by his sister who lived in Rushville. He said it had been more than 5 years since he had been in the hospital in Terre Haute, and he went there on account of an injury he received after falling off an engine while stopped at Logansport, Indiana. During his stay at the hospital, he was cared for by several nuns, but he never took a fancy to any of them. He said that several years after he left the hospital, he heard a sister had been murdered there, but that was all. Murray was arraigned in the city court and his case postponed for 2 days to allow the officers from Kansas to arrive, which is where the crime was supposed to have occurred. However, within a day, a report was received from Emporia, Kansas, which said no Sister of Mercy was ever murdered in their city. However, there was a case of a nun who was raped at the convent of the Sacred Heart under similar circumstances 4 years ago. She was badly hurt but recovered and was sent to another convent to make sure her assailant could not find her. Her attacker was arrested at Terre Haute a few days later but provided an alibi and was released. Hot on the heels of this news, a letter was received by Major Owens from the Chief of Police of Terre Haute. The letter said further investigation into the case found that Robert H. Murray had a double, both in name and appearance. It turned out that both men were hurt in the same wreck near Terre Haute. Both had the thumb and 2 first fingers of their left hand cut off, and both were sent to the Sisters of Mercy Hospital for treatment. The rest of the story was accurate, in which the young nun was murdered after she refused the marriage proposal. One Bob was arrested and charged with the murder, but he provided an alibi that proved he was at Terre Haute when the murder took place in Kansas. The other Bob could not be found, but a year later he was sent to the Jeffersonville prison for grand larceny. The chief said that the sisters at the hospital had once heard that Sister Mary had recovered after lingering illness, but this is thought to be a mistake since one of the men had been arrested on a charge of murder. Or had it only been a case of rape? It's on this cliffhanger that the story simply disappeared from the newspapers. Were there two Bobs? Was a nun murdered or raped, and a man escaped justice from this heinous crime, and another was accused of the deed just because he shared several similarities with the perpetrators? Was there any truth in the entire story? Throughout the articles printed in different newspapers, the nun was reported to have belonged either to the Sisters of Charity or the Sisters of Mercy. However, it was the Sisters of St. Francis who in 1884 had established hospitals in Lafayette and Terre Haute, Indiana, Omaha and Columbus, Nebraska, Emporia, Kansas, and Cleveland. There were no stories in those years reporting any attack, much less a murder against a nun of any order. The police in Emporia, Kansas made this clear. What if there was never any crime committed against a nun, and it was simply a story of revenge? The entire accusation against Robert H. Murray, aka Robert H. Murtha, came about by finger pointing from a clerk at the Jeffersonville prison. This prison had developed a notorious reputation, and in 1887, A.J. Howard, the warden since 1875, had to resign. According to a newspaper story, enough is known of it to make sure that the prison has been carelessly, extravagantly, and dishonestly managed, that prisoners have been ill treated and those who had money were robbed of it, and that Howard's accounts with the state are in such condition as to indicate that he is short some thousands of dollars. The actual amount was in excess of $150,000. Warden Howard would purchase supplies in small quantities from local dealers, and the food given to the convicts was of the poorest quality and insufficient in quantity. The price charged to the state was a high price, and the difference was alleged to have been divided between the dealer, the warden, and the steward. Even the chaplain was in on it. Arthur Brooks, a convict, was promised by Chaplain Kane that he could secure him a pardon on condition he would pay $50 down and then promised to pay an additional $150. Then Brooks was told he had to pay an additional $500 as a retainer to pay Charles Jewett, who was the Democratic Speaker of the House of the Legislature, whose influence would be needed to get the pardon from the governor. Even after Howard had to resign, the prison's reputation was tarnished. Could the story have come about from a failed shakedown of another convict? The murder or rape of a nun was sure to raise outrage, which it did, until perhaps it was discovered the entire thing was fabricated. The fate of the Bobs, if indeed there were two of them, remained unknown. The same holds true for Sister Mary, who was allegedly struck down by an obsessed suitor. That's if she existed at all. In 1892, it was noted that Jeffersonville was overrun with burglars who were supposed to be ex-convicts, such is the fate of towns that surround penitentiaries. So was this truly a case of mistaken identity? That two guys happened to look alike, have kind of the same name, weren't involved in an accident? Or was this guy Ballo, the clerk, who takes the trouble to point the finger at the guy? Maybe this guy they tried to shake down. He was only in there for stealing a hat, and they let him go after a year. All right? This guy had been working on the railroads, and maybe they tried to shake him down, and that when he got out, this Ballo guy from the prison, who sounds like a really great place, came after him and accused him. And and it went all downhill, except for the fact that none of the first of all, it wasn't even the right order of nuns at that city. That's number one. Plus, none of the police departments were saying no. We don't have anything about, and in other words, we don't have an official story about a nun getting killed or raped. We've heard rumors, but again, there was never a concrete case, and I guess I had to let him go, of course. All right, next story. Let's move into a little bit more modern times. So this is a mystery, and this is titled "The Unsolved Murder of Larry Joe Phebus." On March 28, 1963, authorities found the decomposed and nearly nude body of a teenager in a desolate farm field 22.5 miles southwest of Alexander, North Dakota. The boy was found by Clark Jenner and his employee John Mann in a rough terrain lying about half a mile off the country road on the Jenner farm. The body was in a patch of weeds between two plowed fields on a section near Lonely Creek. The body was tossed just south of where US 85 turned east to Watford City. There was no identification with the remains. The blue jeans and shorts were around his ankles and his shoes were nearby. Inside his pant pocket was a flashlight and $1.40 in change. Around him were beer cans, soda bottles, a brown glove, a towel, and a piece of car seat cover of green Turkish cloth. Old car tracks were found on the edge of where the body had been left. Lloyd Powell, county commissioner, said he noticed a strange automobile in the area around the time the boy was murdered. The victim was eventually identified as Larry Joe Phebus of Tioga, age 14. Larry lived with his older brother Chester, who worked in the oil fields for Jacobson's Construction and National Tank in Williston, and he'd been reported missing since October 1962. The brothers had moved there from Petersburg, Indiana since August 1961. Sam Wallace, 19, lived with the brothers and identified the clothing as belonging to Larry Joe Phebus. He told local newspapers, "I gave him the money to buy it. I know it's him." Clarence Lyseth, the McKenzie County coroner, planned to take the body to Minot in order to conduct an autopsy. The coroner tentatively ruled death by strangulation with a clothesline rope that was still wrapped around the boy's neck and wrists. He surmised that it appeared to be a sex crime. Initially, he was not sure if he had died where the body was found or if he had just been dumped there. Larry Phebus was about 5 feet tall, slender, with light brown hair. He'd been wearing blue jeans, a green rust and white sports shirt, black loafers, dark socks, and a black sports jacket with a zipper front. 2 months after his brother had disappeared, Chester Phebus decided to leave for California and abandon his car in Williston, North Dakota. It was impounded, and after the identification of the body, the police were examining it for any clues to the crime. The authorities asked Chester to return in order to help with the investigation. Sheriff Leroy Lutz said, we're living in hope that the brother can give us a missing link that will help solve the crime." In exchange for him returning to speak to police, 3 traffic charges pending since December 19, 1962 against him were dropped, and 30 days in jail were canceled. He had left the state before starting his jail terms for various traffic infractions. He went to California to be with his mother, Mary Harrison, and his sibling, Robert, 16, Linda, 13, and Cindy, 2. He had hoped that Larry would turn up at her house. By this time, Chester had become a father when a daughter named Suzette was born in November 1962. The sheriff was disappointed that Chester could not offer anything to aid in the investigation. By his own request, Chester agreed to take a lie detector test. Sam Wallace also did as well. Both were cleared. Larry's father, Robert Phebus, was in Indiana State Prison serving a sentence since 1959 for armed robbery of a coffee shop. Chester told police he had last seen his brother on October 20th. He left the boy at the Travelers Hotel while he went on a double date with Sam Wallace. As he was leaving, Larry told him, "You'll be sorry you aren't taking me with you." When they returned from the movie theater in Williston, the room was empty. Usually Larry Joe would leave a note so that they wouldn't worry. Larry Joe had been traveling around the U.S. with his brother following work in the oil fields. Chester had left home at an early age and had worked at a little bit of everything. In 1961, he was discharged from the Army after serving with the 2nd Engineers of the 2nd Infantry Division at Fort Benning, Georgia. According to him, he had been to all the states except Hawaii. Larry had been in school only a few weeks and was described as easy to get along with, but his teachers confirmed that he had fallen behind academically. Immediately after Larry's disappearance, Sam Wallace and Chester searched the surrounding area. However, no one had seen or heard from him. 2 days later, on October 22nd, they notified police. The sheriff referenced a case of a 9-year-old boy from Stanley, North Dakota, who had been molested in July 1962. The offender had not been caught. The autopsy confirmed Larry had been sexually molested and strangled. A comparison of dental records confirmed his identity. It's believed that the body had lain at the spot where it was found since December 1962. According to police, Larry Joe Phebus was known to hitchhike between Ray and Tioga, but never further than 30 miles. A year went by, and newspapers noted that the murder was still unsolved and little was being done about it. Sheriff Leroy Lutz said of two major suspects that one had not been interrogated because he could not be found. The other was in Alaska, in an Alaska mental institution, and the state attorney said that for undisclosed reasons this man could be discounted. Sheriff Lutz thought the person might have been a transient, but he also worried for the children in the town if the murderer was a local man. In November 1963, Montana authorities considered a connection with the Phebus murder and the knife slaying of Signe, aka Stormy Timberman, age 8, and the sex slaying of two other children. Timberman was stabbed but not raped. On January 16, 1964, Robert Lee Rollins, age 17, was sentenced to life imprisonment after pleading guilty to first-degree murder in the death of Stormy Timberman. In June 1963, Deborah DeMarias, 5, was found dead in a railway yard in Glendive, Montana. The child had been sleeping with her stepfather, mother, and a 2-year-old brother along the railroad tracks after coming to Glendive on a freight train from Missoula. 4 transients were questioned since the family had stopped in a hobo camp. However, her murder was never solved. Larry's early life seemed to have been turbulent. His father, Robert Phebus, had gone to prison for forgery in the 1950s during his early childhood, and his parents divorced in 1958. A Reddit post from December 2021 reported the following, quote, "So my grandmother was friends with him, Larry Phebus. I'm from Tioga, and he had his genitals cut off, and I believe that is how they decided he was sexually molested. Sorry, I know this is an old thread, but my grandma talks about him from time to time." End quote. Larry's parents outlived at least 3 other children: Donald, who died when he was a year old in 1944, Larry, who was murdered in 1964, and even Chester, the older brother, passed away in 1996. So both of the parents outlived at least 3 of their children. Larry Phoebus's murder has never been solved. Larry's body was found only 20 miles from the scene of a tragedy where a family of 6 were slaughtered in 1930. The Haven family members were Albert, 50, Lulia, 39, Daniel, 18, Leland, 14, Charles, 2, and Mary, 2 months old. They had lived on the farm for more than 10 years. The last time they were seen alive was February 9, 1930. Charles Bannon worked as a hired hand for the Havens and stayed on the land after the family disappeared. He told those who came looking for the Havens that he had rented the place since the family decided to leave the area. James Bannon came to join his son at the farm. Together they worked the land and took care of the livestock. In October 1930, Bannon started selling the farm property and crops. James Bannon left, saying he was trying to find the Haven family. By then the neighbors had become suspicious. On December 1st, 1930, Bannon Sr. wrote a letter telling his son to watch his step and, quote, "do what is right," end quote. On December 2nd, 1930, handwriting experts were examining a letter Bannon claimed was written by Daniel Haven, the oldest boy of the family. Bannon said it was mailed from Colton, Oregon. It seemed authorities weren't convinced about the welfare of the family. The handwriting would be compared to Daniel Bannon's school papers, filed away since his graduation from the 8th grade 2 years before. Authorities compared written statements by Bannon, and they had the same misspelled words as the letter from Oregon. Police were holding him on a charge of embezzling 4 hogs from the missing landlord. A check had been made with the police in Oregon, and there was no knowledge of the family being there. There was also no reference to the box number Mr. Haven had supposedly left as a return address. Authorities had good reason to suspect foul play, since besides their abrupt disappearance, insurance policies were allowed to lapse and taxes go unpaid. It became known that Harold Semple, a farmer near Schaefer, had tried to cash a check made out to Bannon, but the account was closed. Bannon had not tried to straighten the matter out, claiming that he believed Mr. Haven would give him the money due once he returned. He denied embezzling the pigs and some wheat he sold, saying under the agreement made with Bannon that belonged to him. Authorities were also looking for James Bannon, his father. who had driven to the West Coast earlier in the year with a Williston youth. The young man returned to North Dakota and said the elder Bannon disappeared without leaving any word when they reached Portland, Oregon. The police then decided this was a case where the family had been murdered or they were safe by not notifying authorities. Adding credence to the theory that they had left of their own free will was a rumor that Mrs. Haven suffered from a mental disorder and that her attacks had become more severe. In late years, relatives said that Mr. Haven would not have gone this long without communicating with him. A mattress was found in Cherry Creek, 2 miles from the Haven farm. It was recovered from a frozen stream by a deputy sheriff and was sent off to find out if there was any bloodstains on it and if it was tied to the murder. Bannon gave a statement to the deputy sheriff admitting to the murder but claimed it was a stranger who had instigated the act. By the end of December, James F. Bannon was extradited back from Oregon to North Dakota. He was found at an auto camp with newly bought groceries. Police believed he was planning to live in the campsites around the area and stay out of the towns. Charles Bannon gave a second confession to his attorneys and his mother that it all started with the accidental shooting of the eldest child after they quarreled about chores. He was forced to kill Leland, Lulia, and Albert in self-defense. 4 bodies were buried less than 100 feet from the farm home inside the barn. The other 2 bodies were buried a few miles away in an old Indian burial grave on his mother's farm. Bannon spoke of having nightmares about the murder. In one, Mrs. Haven was standing over him with a knife. He said that he would lock the house door at night because he was afraid, since it seemed that people were always peeping in through the window. Another night he dreamt a snake got in through a hole somewhere, and when it came in the house, it changed into a man who looked like Haven. The figure came and stood over him and stared at him a long time. In January 1931, the rifle Bannon used to shoot the Haven family was found. The stock of the gun was under the eaves of a bunkhouse, and a part of the barrel was on top of a chicken house. Bannon said he broke the gun when he struck Mrs. Haven over the head. Charles Bannon wrote a final confession in January 1931, where he told the whole truth, in which he killed the whole family after the accidental shooting, not in self-defense, but because he was scared. He said he had acted alone. He shot the entire family except the baby, which he beat to death. On the night of January 28th or 29th, a crowd of men with masks came looking for Bannon. There were 75 men and at least 15 cars. The mob took the sheriff away from the jail. They battered the front door down and overpowered the deputy. The men took Bannon to the Haven farm, planning to hang him where the family died, but a caretaker ordered them off the property, threatening to shoot any who did not leave. From there, they took him to the bridge over Cherry Creek, a half-mile from the jail. He was pushed over the side of the bridge. Charles Bannon was buried in Riverside Cemetery in Williston, and even present day his grave remains unmarked. Investigation of the hanging noted the noose had been tied by someone with expert knowledge. The governor had ordered investigators to get to the bottom of the hanging, but at the end it was concluded it would be impossible to identify any of the members of the mob. James Bannon escaped being lynched, but was tried for the murders. His trial was moved to another county, where he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He was released on parole in 1950, when he was 76 years old. Present-day Schaefer is a ghost town with just a few buildings left. In 1968, Donna Michalenko mysteriously disappeared from Keefe, North Dakota. Foul play was suspected, but her body was never found, and she's still considered a missing person. At the same time she disappeared, her dog was found shot dead inside an abandoned Lutheran church. Among the sparse and poorly populated fields of North Dakota, no doubt killers can be found. And that's the whole point. When you read these towns, these areas, there was very little people. There was not that many people. And you get not just murder, but very heinous murder took place. So it's like, okay. Now, let's go to real modern times. This is out of Dogo News, and it's titled The Mystery of the Boat Ramming Iberian Orcas. Since 2020, young Iberian orcas from a critically endangered subpopulation of fewer than 40 individuals have been ramming and even sinking boats in the Atlantic Ocean. These incidents typically occur off the coast of Spain, Portugal, and France during spring and summer. This is when the killer whales migrate to the area in search of food. The latest series of attacks occurred on September 13th, 2025, when two boats were targeted on the same day. Around 12:30 p.m. local time, a tourist yacht near Lisbon, Portugal, sank after being struck repeatedly. All five people on board were rescued by nearby boats. Shortly afterward, the Orcas rammed and damaged another boat roughly 12 miles away. The four individuals aboard were safely rescued and the vessel was later towed back to shore. Researchers are not entirely sure of the reason for the orcas' behavior. Some initially suggested that they might be seeking revenge on the boats. However, the idea was quickly dismissed. In May 2024, a group of scientists attributed the strange behavior to boredom. In the past, the orcas' main food source, the Atlantic bluefin tuna, was hard to find. The whales spent most of their time hunting. With plenty of tuna now available, the young orcas have more time for playful activities. In September 2024, scientists at the Bottlenose Dolphin Research Institute in Spain shared another idea. They think young orcas may be using boats to practice their hunting skills. Bruno Diaz Lopez, the Institute's chief biologist, said that even though tuna are plentiful, they are hard to catch. The fish can grow up to 10 feet long and weigh hundreds of pounds. They also swim in big groups and move very fast. To catch one orca takes turns ramming a tuna until it's separated from the group. Maybe one orca hits and then another one hits again, Diaz Lopez explained. Once separated, the orcas chase and exhaust the fish. Then they push it towards shallower water where it becomes easier to catch. The researchers believe sailboats are ideal for this type of practice. They move swiftly and quietly, much like tuna. This is like a training toy, Diaz Lopez said. It's a shame that we humans are in the middle of this game, but they are learning. To avoid encounters, scientists suggest staying away from areas where orcas are seen. Making loud banging noises near the boat may also scare them. Boat owners can also make their vessels less appealing. For example, placing smooth rudders with rougher ones could make the boat less fun for the orcas to play with. At least you hope that they're playing. Let's remember, orcas, orcas are meat eaters. They're predators. Maybe they don't want to play. Maybe they're like, we don't want tuna. We want humans. Never know. It's a strange world out there. So I will be back soon, you guys, with some more strange and unusual stories. Till next time, take care.